One day, I set out to reach that part of the island where the strong current was. On the way there, I thought to myself how ridiculous I would have appeared if some Englishman saw me. I had a big hat, a short jacket, and short trousers all made out of goatskin. I didn't have socks or shoes, but I put some goatskin around my feet. I had 2 belts, one for the gun and knife, and one for the gunpowder. On my back, I had a basket. I also carried a gun on my shoulder and an umbrella made out of goatskin above my head. My beard was pretty long. I realized I was looking very unusual from what I used to look years ago. One day, about lunchtime, I was walking on the beach going to check on my canoe when I came across something surprising. I saw the mark of a human footprint on the sand. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I was scared. I hurried back to my home. I was so scared I couldn't sleep that night. Why was there no canoe? Why were there no more footprints? I thought that maybe it was the footprint of one of the people who probably inhabited the islands around. I began to worry whether they saw my canoe and were now preparing to attack me. Then I convinced myself that maybe I saw the mark of my own foot, and I was a fool to get scared by it. This realization made me feel better. I took my courage, and I went to see the footprint again. Chapter 19. Cannibals. When I approached the footprint, I saw that the footprint was much bigger than the size of my foot. It was impossible that the footprint was mine. I got scared again. That night, I considered letting all my animals into the wild, destroying my fields and my summer house so that no mark of human habitation was left on the island. I was so afraid I couldn't fall asleep the whole night. In the morning, I finally fell asleep for a short time. When I woke up, my head was clear. Now it didn't seem that strange that people lived on the islands around. Maybe they came to my island time to time, or now the wind carried them this way for the first time. I remembered that for the 15 years I lived on the island, I didn't meet any human being or discovered any signs of a settlement here. This calmed me down. Still, I wanted to be safe. I made another wall around my house and left holes through which I could easily fire several guns if attacked. Now I had such a strongly protected house surrounded with walls and thick trees that no one could come near me. I was also worried about my goats. I divided the animals and built a smaller fence in another part of the island. It took me lots of time and effort, but in the end, my animals were safe from any unexpected attack. It was the 16th year of my life on the island when something very sad happened. My dog died. I was crying for 3 days. It was my worst day on the island. I went to my goats and I told them how sad I was. They didn't understand my words, but I felt they understood me. They felt my emotions. They were unusually calm and quiet. It was now 2 years after the footprint on the beach. One day, as I was walking towards the beach, I thought I saw a canoe in the distance. I couldn't be sure, so I just continued my walk. It was then that I came across something terrifying. The whole beach was covered with human remains. Skulls, hands, and feet were all over the place, and there was a black circle after a fire. I was angry and scared at the same time. They were here again, I thought. I was sick and threw up at the horrible sight. I went back to my house and again I considered what to do. I decided to give up going out at sea with my canoe because the cannibals could capture me. I also stopped firing guns because I feared being discovered by the sound. Every time I went out of my house, I carried guns to protect myself in the case of a sudden attack. Soon I started thinking how I could kill some of the cannibals and save their victims if I could. If that wasn't possible, at least I could frighten them so they would never come here again. I began looking at that side of the island where I first saw the human footprint. I wanted to find a hiding place for myself and prepare it for the attack. Then I changed my mind and thought it was unreasonable to fight them because they didn't do any harm to me. Chapter 20. Cave. Eventually, I gave up the preparations altogether and decided to act only if they attacked me first. For a whole year I was hiding my activities as well as I could. I hid my canoe. I kept myself occupied with my animals and fields, but I was very careful. I was afraid to make loud noises, and I was worried every time I made a fire. But I needed fire because I needed to cook. So when I made a fire, I tried to make as little smoke as possible. Smoke could go very high, and it could be seen from a distance. Once when I was cutting some branches in the forest, I discovered a small cave. I went inside it, but as soon as my eyes were okay with the dark, I noticed two bright eyes looking at me. I jumped outside. I was scared to death. I waited, but nothing happened. I went slowly to the beginning of the cave and I listened. I heard something. It sounded as if there was somebody injured inside. I took my gun and I entered the cave slowly. When my eyes could see again, I discovered an old goat. It was dying in the cave. I returned to the cave the next day to find out that the goat was dead. I explored the place and found it very safe. It would make a great hiding place near the beach. That's why I brought some of my guns and some gunpowder there. 23 years passed since I first stepped on this island. Now I was living comfortably and had many animals to keep me company. Pole was repeating my name very pleasantly. I had 2 more parrots, and I taught all of them to pronounce my name. It was the last month of my 23rd year on the island when, as I was walking to my fields early one morning, I saw fire on the beach. I immediately returned to my house and loaded all guns. I took my telescope and went close to the beach. I hid myself and observed them. I saw 9 naked people who came in 2 canoes. It seemed that they were waiting for the high tide to leave the island. As soon as they left, I went to the beach. It was full of blood and bones again. This made me sick and angry, and I decided to kill as many of them as I could the next time I saw them. They didn't return for a long time. Meanwhile, something else happened that disturbed my routine. One evening, I was disturbed out of my ordinary activities by the sound of a gun at sea. I got out of my house, and I saw a flash coming from the sea. A second shot followed. I thought it was coming from some ship in danger asking for help. I took all the dry wood I could find around and ran to the beach where I made a big fire. They probably saw the fire because they fired again. I thought, I will speak to somebody tonight. This is great. I kept the fire until midnight, but there was no sign of them. It was strange. It was something what my brain couldn't understand. Maybe in the morning I will know more, I thought. Chapter 21. Visitors. The next day in the morning I saw the ship. The ship stopped far from the beach. The ship looked empty. I didn't understand it. I expected the people who fired the gun yesterday. I really wanted to communicate to somebody. I missed communication with real people very much. I took my canoe, and I decided to go to the ship to see if there was anybody still alive on board. The ship looked Spanish, and it was completely destroyed. When I got closer, I saw a dog. He was very happy to see me. I gave him bread, and I gave him water. He was hungry and extremely thirsty. I found nobody on the ship. What happened to the men from the ship? I thought. It was very strange. I didn't have an answer to this question. It was a mystery. There were many boxes with different things on the ship. Some boxes were small, some boxes were big. Many of the big boxes had bottles with alcohol in them. But these boxes were too heavy. I couldn't take them on the canoe. I found guns and gunpowder. I took them to the canoe. I also found some other useful things. I returned to the island in the evening with several small boxes on my canoe. I had some new shirts and also gold, silver, and a lot of gunpowder. Gunpowder was important to me. On the island, it was more valuable than any money or precious metals. There was something else which I needed very much, and that was shoes. I found 2 pairs of shoes on board the ship. I took them with me. I put all my new things in the cave. I made 5 trips to the ship. I took everything useful for me. Then I hid the canoe again and went back to my house. Everything went back to normal. Time went quickly. I often thought about the men from the ship and the cannibals on the beach. These thoughts were always in the back of my mind, day and night. It was one night in March when I dreamed that 2 canoes with cannibals landed on the beach. One of their victims ran away and came to my house where I saved him. Then we became friends. He helped me navigate out of the dangerous currents around the island. I woke up, but the dream stayed in my mind. I realized that if I had somebody to help me, I might be able to escape from the island and reach the continent. Maybe I could save one of the victims brought to this island. I decided to look out for the cannibals, and for the next 1.5 years, I went daily around the beach, hoping to see canoes. This finally happened one morning. I saw 5 canoes with more than 30 men on the beach. I couldn't attack them because they were too many, so I just waited. I was observing them through my telescope. They made a fire and they were dancing around it. I also saw 2 men, the victims, tied together. The 2 tied men were taken to the fire after a while. One was beaten and killed. The cannibals painted their bodies with his blood. It was like a theater. But this wasn't a theater. It was real. It was horrible. But I couldn't do anything. There were too many cannibals. The second man waited on the side. When the cannibals didn't look, the second man jumped up and he started to run away. He was running in my direction. I ran to the beach and I hid behind a tree. I saw that he was followed only by 2 cannibals. This was the right moment to save the prisoner. The man ran as fast as possible, but the cannibals were closer and closer to him. Their speed was faster than his. Chapter 22. Friday. I prepared 2 guns and I waited behind the tree. The prisoner ran directly to my tree, but he still didn't see me. I didn't move. Then he ran around me. I was still hidden behind the tree. When the first cannibal ran close to me, I jumped from behind the tree. He was shocked. I shot him. The second cannibal saw this. He tried to shoot an arrow at me. I had to shoot him too. The prisoner stopped when he heard the shots and he turned. He was scared. I smiled at him. I showed him that it was okay to come closer. He came to me. He went down to his knees. He put his head on the ground. Then he took my foot. He put my foot on his head. I showed him to stand up. He stood up and looked at the dead cannibals. He went to their bodies. He looked at the holes in their bodies. He probably couldn't understand what happened to the cannibals. It was unbelievable to him. He took the arrows from the dead men. We took the bodies of the cannibals. We hid the bodies in the forest near. Then we went into the deeper forest. I took the man to my cave. The cave was my secret. Nobody could find us there. I gave him bread, meat, and some water. He was so tired that he fell asleep almost immediately. I had an opportunity to look at him. I could see he was young, slim, but very strong. I thought he was about 25 years old. He had long black hair, dark skin, and a pleasant face. I let him sleep, and I went outside. I stayed near the cave, and I watched for the cannibals. But they didn't look for us. 3 hours later, the man came out of the cave. He showed me how happy he was, that he was alive and safe. I started speaking to him. I named him Friday because it was Friday when I saved his life. I told him my name and I taught him yes and no. We stayed in the cave that night. The next day, we went on top of the hill. I saw through my telescope that the canoes were gone. We were alone on the island. We went carefully to the beach. First we went to the place where we hid the bodies of the dead cannibals. When we found them, Friday wanted to eat them. I was angry. I showed to Friday that it wasn't good to eat them. Here, I understood that Friday was also a cannibal. We buried the cannibals. Then we walked to the beach. What we saw was horrible. There were human bones all around. The sand was red with blood. I asked Friday to collect all the body parts. I prepared a big fire. I decided to burn the body parts in the fire. We went to my house. I made a little tent for Friday between the 2 fences which were around my house. I took all his weapons away. I wanted to feel safe. After a while, I realized this wasn't necessary at all, because Friday was a very faithful and honest man. He was like a child to me, and I was like a father to him. On many occasions later, he showed me he would sacrifice his life to save mine. I was very happy to have Friday around, and I began teaching him everything he needed to know about life like a European. First, I taught him some new words. I started with hi, hello, bye, thank you. It wasn't easy at the beginning, but I was patient because I was happy. I could speak to somebody. Chapter 23. Conversation. 2 days later, I shot a young goat. Friday was scared of the gun. He didn't understand how such a small thing could kill a goat. He didn't want to touch the gun. Later, I saw how he talked to the gun. He probably asked the gun not to kill him. We took the goat. We made a nice soup. Before the soup was finished, Friday went to the forest and he brought some herbs. He put them into the soup. The herbs were similar to pepper. The soup smelled fantastic and it tasted fantastic too. We cooked some of the goat meat the next day with sauce. Again, Friday brought some herbs and also plants. The herbs made the sauce taste great. They made a big difference. And we made a nice salad from the plants. I taught Friday how to prepare corn and bake bread out of it, and in a few days, he could do it as well as me. Then we started expanding my garden, and he helped me plant more corn. In all activities, Friday was of great help. He was also very good at catching fish. Our cooperation was simply great. We were a good team. I wanted to teach Friday to speak English very well. I wanted to teach him English as fast as possible. I wanted to be a good teacher. I took my role very seriously. I thought about the best method to teach him English. When I spoke to him fast, and when I used all the words and grammar, he didn't understand me. So I tried to speak mainly in the present, and I used simple words. I also said only short sentences. This way, Friday understood more. We spoke about many topics. When Friday didn't understand something, I pointed at it, or I tried to explain the word to him. If it didn't help, I made a picture of the thing in the sand. Soon, Friday started to understand many of my sentences in the present. He also started to use some words. His pronunciation was very bad at the beginning, but it wasn't important for me. I understood him, and I was very happy somebody spoke to me. Friday was a good student. He was clever and he improved quickly. Soon he could say some words like an Englishman. Of course, not all the words, but the words which he said correctly made me very happy. I could see that Friday very often repeated aloud what I said. I thought that it also helped him to learn so fast. I thought, learning a language is quite easy. You only need to copy what you hear, and if you don't understand something, you need a picture of it. Then you need a lot of practice. This is the best system. Friday's progress was fast. He was able to talk more and more every day. In a couple of months, we could have a basic, simple conversation. Friday liked my tools. They were very interesting for him. He especially liked the telescope. He borrowed the telescope very often. He went to one of the hills, and he watched everything around. Once I asked him about his people and how he became a prisoner. He told me that they ate human meat like their opponents. In fact, in the past, he did a ritual on the other side of my island. He was probably one of the cannibals who I saw a long time ago. He told me about the sea and the currents in the sea. Thanks to Friday, I learned about the history, culture, and traditions of his people. I also told him my personal story, and I described England and Europe to him. Chapter 24. Knife. I told Friday about our cities, schools, ships, and traveling around the world. I told him that education is important in Europe, and that we study from books. It was all new to him. Friday's people didn't need schools on the islands. They had all what they needed for their life. When I felt I could trust him enough, I showed him how gunpowder worked. I taught him how to use a gun. I gave him a knife and a belt. He was happy with my presence. He said that he saw a similar knife before. I asked to tell me more. He explained that his people saved white men from a small boat, and that they still lived with them. He counted 17 Europeans who lived with his people. I thought these might be the sailors from the ship which came to my island some time ago. They probably saved themselves in a boat, because I didn't find anybody when I went on board to look for survivors. I asked Friday to tell me more about them. He told me that they were okay. I was happy to hear that some Europeans lived not very far from my island. I started to plan how to meet them. The next day, we went on a small trip around the island. First, we went to the cross, where I wanted to mark another day. "What is it?" asked Friday when we came to the cross. I explained that we have 7 days in a week. When Friday heard the word Friday, he laughed. I explained to him that I saved him on Friday. That's why I called him Friday. Now, he fully understood the meaning of his name. During the walk, Friday told me, "If we built a canoe and go to my island, I will tell my people how you saved my life." I took Friday to the other side of the island. I showed him my canoe there, but he said, "This canoe is too small for 2 people. We should make a bigger canoe." Soon, we started building the canoe we needed. We chose and cut a big tree, and I showed him how to cut the inside to form a canoe. It took us a month to do this, and 2 days more to drag it to the beach. The canoe was ready, and we were ready too. The day before we wanted to go, Friday went to the beach. He came back very quickly. He looked very scared. Before I asked him what happened, he said that there were 3 canoes on the beach. He was scared because he thought the cannibals returned to look for him. He said, "There is a war between 2 groups of local people. We are neighbors, but we don't like each other. We had many conflicts in the past. There was never peace. We kill each other whenever we can. When they see me, they will kill me." I told him, "Don't worry, we are strong, and maybe they didn't come for you today. We will see." We took 15 guns. We went on top of a hill. We saw 14 cannibals, 2 prisoners, and 3 canoes on the beach. They stopped close to the place where the forest was near the beach. This made it easier to attack them and save the prisoners. We approached them quietly through the forest. While we were walking, I was considering my right to kill them. Maybe I had no reason to shoot so many people who didn't do any bad to me. After some thinking, I decided only to watch and attack them only if it was necessary. Chapter 25. Father. When we were very close to the beach, we saw that the cannibals were around the fire. They started to eat the first of their prisoners. The second prisoner was still alive. He wasn't one of Friday's people. He was European. The cannibals wanted to eat him too. I decided to save him if it was possible. We moved closer to the place where the cannibals were gathered. The cannibals were still round the fire, but 2 went for the white man. When I saw this, I loaded the guns and asked Friday to do exactly what I did. We fired quickly at the cannibals from 6 guns. We killed 3 and injured 2 of the cannibals. The rest jumped up to their feet, but didn't know which way to run because they didn't know from which direction the danger was coming. Some of them ran to their canoes. Some of them stayed on the beach. We continued shooting, and we shot 3 other cannibals. After that, we took our guns, and we ran to the beach. We shouted very loud. I ran to the prisoner, and Friday shot the nearest cannibal. I freed the European. He said something in Spanish to me. I gave him a gun. He was weak, but he could shoot from a gun if some cannibal attacked him. The cannibals were shocked by our sudden attack. Our unusual guns scared them a lot. Only 2 cannibals tried to fight us. We shot them with our guns. Friday fought very well. He quickly killed 1 cannibal who was injured. The second injured cannibal ran into the forest. Friday ran after him, and he killed him with his knife. Only 3 cannibals were able to run away. They jumped into their canoe, and they started to leave. Friday shot at them, but he didn't hit them. It was dangerous to let them go because they could tell their people about us. Friday and I wanted to jump in one of their canoes to chase them, but to our surprise, we found another tied person on the bottom. He was scared because he didn't see the fight, but only heard it. The ropes were so tight around his neck that he was going to die soon if I didn't cut them. When Friday saw him, he started to cry. Then he laughed and he hugged the man. Then he jumped and began dancing around him. Then he cried and laughed at the same time. When the strongest emotions were gone, Friday told me that the prisoner was his father. I felt tears in my eyes when I saw the son's love for his father. This happy incident delayed us, and the cannibals were already gone. Friday returned to the canoe and held his father's head to his chest. Then he rubbed his father's hands and feet with his hands to warm him up. Soon Friday's father was feeling much better. When they talked, Friday suddenly jumped up and ran to the forest as fast as he could. When he came back, he had a bottle full of fresh water. He handed the bottle to his father, who was dying with thirst. After he drank and was feeling better, I asked Friday to give the rest of the water to the Spanish, who needed water very much too. The Spanish was very grateful to me, but he was so weak. He couldn't get up on his feet. I asked Friday to rub his hands and feet just as he did to his father. It helped him a lot. Then I asked the Spanish to go to the canoe with Friday's help because I wanted to take them to our place. Friday, however, being young and strong, just took the Spanish on his back and carried him to the canoe. Then he carefully put him there and arranged so that both he and his father were comfortable. Chapter 26. Dinner. When the Spanish was inside the canoe, Friday jumped out of the canoe and guided it along the beach faster than I could walk. We soon reached the place where I saved Friday. Friday helped our new guests out of the canoe, but they weren't able to walk. We had to carry them to our home. We had another problem when we reached the house. Friday's father and the Spanish couldn't go over the fence or climb a ladder, and I didn't want to destroy the fence. I wanted to pull them over the fence. But then I realized the cannibals were already gone. We could stay outside the fence. We made a comfortable tent for them outside the fence and prepared soft beds for them too. As soon as we finished this, I started cooking dinner. Friday brought some fish, and we cooked them quickly. We all had dinner together in the tent. Friday was my interpreter because the Spanish spoke the language of Friday's people. After that, I asked Friday to go back to the beach and bring us the weapons we left in our hurry. I also asked him to bury the bodies of the killed cannibals the next day. He did as I said, so later when I went to the beach, I could hardly recognize the place if it wasn't for the big tree behind which we were hidden. The next morning, I asked Friday's father what he thought of the cannibals returning to kill us. He said our guns created a great shock. They didn't know how we won the battle using them. He said he heard them shout in their language that Friday and I were spirits sent from heaven to punish them with fire. I was still worried the cannibals might return with a bigger army, but nothing of the kind happened. When our guests were strong enough, I began to think about the journey by sea again. I asked the Spanish about his arrival on these islands, and he said that he was on a Spanish ship going to Havana. There were 16 Europeans, Spanish, and Portuguese on Friday's home island. He told me that the storm broke the ship near my island. They saved themselves in a boat. Now they lived with Friday's people. I asked the Spanish whether they tried to make another sea journey. Of course they wanted to go home, but he said that they had no tools with which to build another ship. I showed the Spanish the tools which I had from the ship. He said that with my tools, it was possible to build a ship. I thought the Spanish and Friday's father could return to their island. They could tell other Europeans about the possibility to build a ship. Together, we could go to Brazil or Havana, or maybe Europe. However, the Spanish suggested something else. He told me that it would be better to wait for at least half a year, because there wasn't enough food for 16 more men on my island. We wouldn't have enough food to eat while building the ship, and much less to take with us for the long journey. The Spanish advised me to plant more corn, and he and Friday's father helped us expand the fences and fields. We caught more goats. We increased the number of goats to 50 animals. We collected a lot of fruit. Then, we dried the fruit. We started preparing the materials for the ship. We chose a few trees, and I showed them how to cut them to form long boards. In half a year, we had a lot of food. We had so much corn that we needed more baskets and pots to store it all. We saw that the Spanish was very good at making baskets. He had a great talent. His baskets were excellent. He also used a special technique to make baskets. The technique was fast and effective. He made the baskets 3 times faster than me. I asked him to teach me his skill. I wasn't as fast as him, but I was faster than before. Chapter 27. Englishman. We put all the food in my cave. It was safe there. Then the Spanish and Friday's father could go back. They could bring the other men here. We gave them food and 4 guns in case they were attacked again. Then they took the canoe and they went away. 2 days passed since they left when something unexpected happened. I was woken up by Friday at about 6 o'clock in the morning. "Are they here?" I asked Friday. He said, "Not yet. But somebody else is here. I saw a boat." I went to the top of the nearest hill. I saw the boat. It was clear that these people weren't the friends who we expected. The boat came from a completely different direction. I could also see a ship. I knew this shape. The ship was English. I was confused. On one hand, I was happy to see Englishmen after 27 years on the island. On the other hand, I was concerned because the island was quite out of the way of any English ship. Recently, there were no storms which could have taken them here. Perhaps they were pirates or murderers and were hiding here. All this made me very cautious. Friday and I remained hiding, observing them for a while. The boat approached the beach and I counted 11 men. They were all Englishmen. 3 of the men had hands tied together. The 8 other men took them to the beach. 2 prisoners were calm, but the 3rd prisoner tried to say something. He looked very scared. He asked the men in the boat for something. On seeing this, Friday turned to me and told me that it seemed Englishmen were also eating people. I told him that they didn't have the slightest intention of eating them. Instead, I thought they were going to shoot them. After a while, I noticed this wasn't the case. The people from the boat went exploring the island, while the 3 tied prisoners were sitting at the beach with 2 men as guards. They looked desperate. The situation made me think of my own arrival on the island. Just like those prisoners, I felt lost at first. Soon the tide was low, and the boat they came with was stuck in the sand. They couldn't move it, so I heard them shout to each other that they would leave with the next tide. This gave me 10 hours. The night was approaching, so we would get an opportunity to go near them and overhear their conversations. Now I was sure they came here to leave those 3 men here as a punishment. Friday and I stayed hidden until dark. I noticed the men who stood guard were asleep, and the 3 prisoners were sitting under a tree quite close to us. It seemed to me they were also out of sight from the other sailors, so I could approach them without being seen. I went to them with Friday, following closely behind me. When we were very close to them, I spoke quietly to them. We were still hidden behind the trees, and they couldn't see us. When they heard my voice, they couldn't believe somebody spoke English to them from the dark forest. "What was that?" asked one of the men. "I heard something. I heard a tree speak," answered the other. "But it is impossible. A tree can't speak English." "Yes, you heard something, but it isn't a tree," I said quietly. "My name is Robinson Crusoe. I am an Englishman. I live on this island. I will help you if you tell me who you are." After the initial shock was over, one of them answered my questions. He was the captain of the ship, but some of the sailors started a mutiny. He, his assistant, and a passenger were taken prisoners. The other sailors were going to leave them on this island to starve to death. The captain told me that there were only 2 dangerous sailors who took control over the others in this group. If the leaders were captured, the rest would return under the command of the captain. Chapter 28. Control. I said, "I am willing to help you, but I have one condition. I want full control over the ship if we manage to get it back." The captain and the other 2 prisoners agreed, and they gave me full control over the ship and over their lives. We freed the prisoners. Then we went back to the forest. I gave them guns and we started to plan the attack. In the middle of our conversation, we noticed that the sailors who stood guard were woken up. They stood up. They shouted to 3 other men who were near to them. At that moment, we shot the guards. Then the captain spoke to the 3 other men. He told them to be loyal to him and help him get back to the ship. They agreed, and we tied them and left them on the beach. The other 3 men who heard the shots came back. They could see the situation changed. We were 5. We had a lot of guns. The situation was bad for them. They also agreed to be loyal to the captain. We tied these men too. We hid our 6 prisoners in the forest. Then I and the captain had finally time to talk to each other. I told him my story, and he was shocked. He also thanked me a lot for my help. He and his 2 friends were hungry, so we went to my house, where I showed them what I built for myself during my stay on the island. They were amazed by all the things which I had. However, we didn't have much time to explore my inventions, because we had to plan how to get the ship back. There were 16 people on board, and we were only 5. First, we decided to take everything out of the boat. We thought the sailors could send another boat to the island if the men from the first boat didn't come back with the next high tide. In the morning, we heard the ship fire a gun as a signal for the boat to return. After a while, the ship fired a few times again. There was no response. Then we noticed that the sailors took another boat and went to the beach. Through my telescope, I could see 8 men rowing, and they were all armed. We could observe the boat approach us, and the captain recognized the sailors. He knew that 6 of them were still faithful to him, but there was also the man who started the mutiny. The captain feared that the leader of the mutiny and the other men in the boat would be difficult to defeat, but I told him that we had a good chance of winning. But we had to act quickly. The captain trusted 2 of our prisoners. They promised to fight on our side, so we gave them weapons. Prepared this way, with 7 men ready to fight on our side, we expected the arrival of the boat. As soon as it reached the beach, the men jumped out of it and pulled it up the beach. Then they ran to the other boat and were surprised to see it empty. They tried to call their friends. They shouted their names, then shot in the air, but it was all useless because nobody shouted back. This surprised the newly arrived sailors even more, and they began putting the boat in water again. It seemed they wanted to go back to the ship to inform the others that some accident happened with the sailors in the first boat. Observing all this, the captain got scared they would go back to the ship and leave the island altogether. Luckily, during a few seconds, the sailors dropped this idea. Now, they left 3 men in the boat, and the others went to the forest to look for their friends. Chapter 29. Plan. We continued observing all actions of the 2 groups. The 5 men in the forest sat down under a tree. After a long consultation under the tree, they got up and walked towards the beach. They probably gave up looking for their friend, and we had to act quickly before they reached their boat. I had a plan. I told the assistant to go with Friday more to the center of the island and shout at the sailors. When the sailors heard this, they shouted back. Then they started going in the direction of the voice. Friday and the assistant continued shouting back. They started to take the sailors to the opposite side of the island. This strategy worked as I planned. The 5 men were soon very far from the beach. This was very good for us. We went to the 3 men in the boat. We explained the situation to them. They decided not to fight us. They became our prisoners too. Meanwhile, Friday and the captain's assistant returned. They led the others so far away that they wouldn't return sooner than in 2 hours. We hid and waited for them. When they returned, they were very tired. When the sailors came to the boat, they were amazed to find it empty. They started calling their friend, but again, there was no response. After a while, the leader of the mutiny and two others separated from the rest and walked towards the forest where we were hiding. The captain and Friday attacked them as soon as they were closer to us and away from the group. The leader was killed on the spot, a second man was injured, and the third one ran back. Then we all emerged from the forest and we ran to the boat. The captain spoke to sailors. He asked them to give up. When the sailors understood the situation, they dropped their weapons quickly. We decided to tie the prisoners, but we didn't tie all of them. The captain trusted 3 of the men. We didn't tie these 3 men. Now we were 10 men. We started to plan how to get the ship. After some discussion, we knew what to do. Friday and I stayed on the island. We had to watch the prisoners. The captain, his assistant, and the passenger took the clothes of some of the prisoners. They wanted to look like them. Then the captain and his sailors took the boat. They went to the ship. When they were near the ship, they spoke to the men on the ship. They told them it wasn't possible to find the other men. When all of the men from the boat were on the ship, the captain showed himself, and the attack began. Several sailors were injured in the battle. There was only 1 person shot, and he was the second leader of the mutiny. As soon as the captain regained possession of the ship, he ordered 7 guns to be fired, which was the signal we agreed on. I was happy to hear those shots. Soon the captain went back to the island. We hugged each other. He told me that the ship was now under my control. I was so happy. I started crying so much that I wasn't able to speak. After I calmed down a little, the captain ordered his men to bring a lot of food from the ship to the island. We were going to have a nice meal to celebrate our victory and my departure from the island. There was expensive wine, excellent tobacco, pork, beef, and peas. There were biscuits for dessert. I was very happy to taste all those things again. The captain gave me clean clothes. I didn't wear clothes for a long time. The clothes were very light. They were a little uncomfortable first, but it was soon fine. When the meal was over and I had clean clothes again, the captain and I had to discuss what to do with the 5 prisoners who the captain didn't trust. The men were really horrible. He even feared taking them on board the ship in chains. I suggested discussing the matter with them and seeing if, perhaps, they would choose to stay on the island instead of going back to England where they faced death for mutiny. We met the prisoners and explained the new situation to them. They had to choose between a death sentence in England and a life on the island, and they went for the second option. We put them in the cave. The cave was now the prison. I told them to wait for more orders. Chapter 30. Son. I needed some time to prepare for the journey. I had to think about what to take with me. In fact, I didn't need to take many things. I decided to take my dog, my parrot, my book, and some other small things. I also took the money, gold, and silver which I found in the ships. They were finally useful to me. I met with the prisoners one more time. I showed them my corn and my domestic animals and told them what I discovered and what I built on the island. Then I went on board the ship. We left the island on the 19th of December, 1686. It was 27 years, 2 months, and 19 days since I first stood on the island. First, we went to the island where Friday's people lived. The Spanish and Portuguese sailors were very happy when they saw us. They were happy that we had a ship. Now we didn't have to build a new ship. We could go to Europe. My dog was very happy too. When he saw one of the Spanish sailors, he ran to him very quickly. He jumped on him. He was extremely happy. The Spanish sailor was his owner. He was very happy too. He started crying when he saw his dog. It was a very emotional meeting. The sailors started to prepare for our journey across the ocean. Friday had to make a decision. He could stay with his people, or he could go to Europe with me. He needed some time to think about it. We stayed on the island one night. In the morning, I asked Friday if he made a decision. He told me that he wanted to go with me to Europe. He prepared everything for the journey. We were ready to go. We started our journey. 2 months later, after a safe journey across the ocean, I stepped on English soil again. 35 years passed since I left my homeland. It seemed to me the whole world changed in that time. London was a different city. There were some new houses, streets, roads, shops, parks, and big bridge across the river. But it wasn't all. People also changed. They had different clothes. Women had different hairstyle. Men had different hats and new types of guns. People used new tools which I didn't see before. They had new names for these tools. It was all very interesting. The style of music in the pubs was also different. I heard new songs. I liked this new style. I wanted to sing these new songs. From London, I returned to my town, York. My parents were both dead. I found some relatives. My sister, my uncle, and my aunt were still alive. They were happy to see me, but they thought I was long dead, so I had no rights to family's money or land. But I could stay and live in their house. England was a big shock to Friday. Everything was so new for him. He saw so many things for the first time in his life. It was all very interesting for him. He liked this new experience. What he didn't like was the cold weather in winter. It was February. Snow, ice, freezing weren't good for him. It wasn't logical to him why we lived in such conditions. I told him that in summer the weather is much better. I sent a letter to Brazil. I still knew the address very well. I wanted to contact people in Brazil. I wanted to know if my wife was still alive. I wanted to know if my plantation still existed. But I didn't know what to expect. The connection was broken many years ago. In May, I got a letter and some packets from my wife. She wrote, she waited 10 years for me. Then she stopped believing I was alive. She married again, and she had a family. But her new husband died 2 years ago. I also got a letter from my wife's father. He took care of my plantation. In his letter, he wrote detailed calculations of the expenses and profit from the plantation during all these years. They both sent me many nice presents. They sent some nice skins and a little box full of gold. They also sent me some boxes of sugar to sell. My wife had also a big surprise for me. She wrote that I had a son. It was great news. He was born 8 months after I left Brazil. He was now a big man, and he wanted to meet me. So many things happened to me in such a short time. It was shocking. I wanted to cry. Then I wanted to laugh. All the emotions were too much for me. I wasn't able to calm down. I stood up. I sat down. I stood up again. I walked around the room. I laughed. Then I cried again. When I calmed down a little, I started to think about what to do. Chapter 31. Brazil. I thought about moving back to Brazil. I wanted to see my son, my wife, and my plantation. After some longer thinking, I decided to go to Brazil, but only for a visit. I wanted to see if I could live there again. I wrote to my wife. I asked her if it was okay to visit them for some days. With the letter, I sent nice presents to her and her father's family. After some time, I got a letter from my wife. She wrote that I was welcome to visit them. Her invitation made me happy. I started to plan another journey by sea. I bought nice presents for them. 2 weeks later, I was ready to go. When we arrived to Brazil, I met with my wife and my son. She changed a lot, but she was still very beautiful. My son was a big man now. He was very intelligent. He had his own family, too. He had also big responsibility. He managed plantations of all the family, and he was responsible for a big land. My son spoke only Portuguese and a little Spanish. My Portuguese wasn't very good after so many years. I forgot many words. I remembered only some basic phrases. But with practice, I started to remember the words fast. After 2 weeks, I could have a basic conversation on many topics, and 1 month later, I was able to speak fluently and automatically. I was very happy that I could speak with my wife and my son. We had so many things for a conversation. Soon after arriving to Brazil, we had a big party. It was a celebration of my son's birthday, and also my arrival to Brazil. Brazil also changed a lot. Many things were different from what was in my memory. Plantations were much bigger. Many people worked on them. I was with my family for 3 months. I knew I wasn't very far from my island. I started thinking about visiting the island again. I wanted to see the island for some days. Friday also wanted to see the island again. My son also wanted to go. I thought it wasn't a good idea. I knew how dangerous the sea could be, but he wanted to see the place that he knew only from my stories. We planned our journey. 2 weeks later, we left Brazil. We went on a ship which went to Havana. We had an agreement with the captain to stop at my island on the way there. When I arrived at my island, we met with Friday's people. They now lived on the island. I asked them, "What happened to the prisoners? Did you eat them?" They told me they didn't eat Europeans. They ate only their enemies from other islands. They told me that when they came to the island, the prisoners were dead. They probably killed each other. I wanted to stay on the island and my son too. I asked the captain if he could pick us up on the way back. He agreed. I saw many children who ran around. It was interesting to see many people on the island where I lived alone for so many years. I saw that the people on the island were very happy. Friday was happy there too. He met a woman who he liked very much. Friday asked me what I thought about his staying on the island. He knew that I saved his life in the past. He didn't want to leave me without asking me. I agreed. I saved him, but he didn't have to stay with me all his life. It was time for Friday to start his own family. I was happy he found a good woman. I was happy when I saw they were in love. I respected Friday's decision to stay on the island with his woman. I walked around the island a lot. I wanted to visit all the places I knew from my life on the island. I had some favorite places, for example, the Fruit Valley. I spent a lot of time there. I liked this place very much. My son liked the island too. He often walked around the island with me. I told him many other stories about my life here. We stayed on the island for 20 days. Then the ship from Havana came. It was time to leave. We said goodbye to Friday and his people. When we left the island, I had a strange feeling. I also felt tears in my eyes. I liked this place very much. It was my home for a long time. I thought, I will never see this place again. Hope you have enjoyed the reading.